It was a nail-biter competition that came down to the last routine, and the Michigan Wolverines were crowned the 2025 NCAA Men's Gymnastics Champions. 2020 Olympic Champion Hashimoto Daiki edged out 2024 Olympic Champion Oka Shinnosuke for his 5th straight All-Japan Championship. And of course, we'll dive into whether Paul Judah had a 0.1 or a 0.3 neutral deduction on that final vault that may have cost Stanford their shot at history. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. This is episode 67, where I recap the 2025 NCAA Championships plus other elite news.
This is the Neutral Deductions podcast, men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis.
For the first time in over a decade, the Men's National Gymnastics Championships were broadcast on ESPN. Finally, we got a professional broadcast with world-class commentators, and this is something that we have been asking for as a community for a really long time. So there was a main broadcast, and you could end up watching every single routine on the event streams. It was almost everything that we could have asked for. I would say, as a whole, it would be really nice if next year they were able to add in difficulty plus execution scores and maybe neutral deductions on the screen. But overall, I thought that this was an excellent job well done. Small disclaimer, I was there working with ESPN as a stats analyst, but I do have to say, overall, the commentary that I've heard, people are so appreciative and they were so excited to be able to watch this competition. So before we get into the team competition, I want to highlight a couple of the important individual stories from the NCAA Championships. So one of the big things I saw overall was vault upgrades everywhere. So Jasper Smith-Corden, we got a cause double from him. Ricky Mays, we got a cause double. And Kale Palacio threw out a Dragolescu. This was so exciting. So these were some of the individual competitors who didn't quite make it into finals with the team. And they brought some of the biggest and best gymnastics that we saw. So that was something that was really special to see in finals. Another cool story was that Matthew Roth of Greenville made it to pommel horse finals, and he is the son of Bill Roth, who is the originator of the Roth skill on pommel horse. So he didn't do the Roth in qualifications, but in finals, as a tribute to his dad, he did the Roth skill there. Another maybe behind the scenes piece of information that I thought was really special at these championships was there was so much support from USA Gymnastics. So Lily Lung was there. She, of course, is a Michigan alum. Brett McClure, Jason Woodnick were all there. And they sent their queen of media, who was there on the floor taking pictures and video. And I think for a long time, a lot of people in the men's gymnastics community felt that the men's program was overlooked. And I think having so many people from USA Gymnastics there on the floor was really important and gave the message that they are prioritizing men's gymnastics and that it is important to USA Gymnastics. Now, moving into the main star of these competitions, the team final. So coming into this competition, there were 3 main teams that we were all watching for the national title: OU, Michigan, and Stanford. We were pretty sure Nebraska and Penn State would end up qualifying to finals, and that the final spot for the team finals was going to come down to Illinois and Ohio State. That's exactly what happened. No surprises there. So the final qualification session was actually really interesting. So Ohio State was actually leading Illinois by about 4 points going into the 5th rotation, but Ohio State still had to go to high bar, which was one of their lowest scoring events, and Illinois had pommel horse, which was precarious, but also one of their best scoring events. And they did manage to actually flip-flop, and Illinois did end up taking that final spot into team finals. So following qualification, Michigan had the highest qualification score out of any one of the 2 sessions, so they got their first pick, and they chose to start on parallel bars, which I was actually really surprised about. I thought maybe they would start on vault like they did in qualifications, or maybe start on something like pommel horse, because that's something that the 2014 team did, and I wasn't sure like how superstitious they were going to be about, starting on the different events. So then it sort of zigzagged. So whoever had the highest score in qualification from one session, then it went to the highest qualification score of the next session. So then Nebraska got to choose, and they chose vault. So everyone made sure that Stanford didn't get to start on vault, which I thought was kind of funny. Then Stanford chose to start on high bar. Then Oklahoma chose pommel horse. Illinois hilariously got to choose Olympic order with the 5th pick. And historically, Olympic order was always the preferred order because it's the one that the teams compete the most because they compete at home in Olympic order. And for some reason, teams are sort of going away from that in championship competition. But it's still a pretty good rotation for most people. And so as the second to last pick, Illinois got that rotation. And then, of course, Penn State had the final pick, and they ended up having to start on rings, which is the spot that no one wants to be in because then you have to end on pommel horse. I will say, speaking of pommel horse, the other thing I was really looking forward to besides the team final was battle pommel horse. All of the major players ended up making it into the final, which is what you want. You want to compete against the best and win. So we definitely knew that we were in for an exciting competition. So let's recap the predictions that I made in the last episode. So for team, I said that OU or Michigan were going to win. I said Frederick Richard would win the all-around. For floor, I said either Taylor Burkhart or Chase Mondi. For pommel horse, Patty Hoops or Brandon Dang. Still rings, Asher Hong without a doubt. Vault, Cam Nelson. Parallel bars, Joshua Carnes or Frederick Richard. And high bar, Emery Donnelly. And then I predicted that with the win of either OU or Michigan, we were going to get a Paul Judah or Emery Donnelly meltdown. So in team finals, Nebraska started off on vault in the first rotation with a big vault from Luke James, and Nebraska never looked back the entire rotation, including a huge cause double from Chase Mondi. What was really interesting to me during this rotation was that Alex Natache's vault, which starts 0.4 lower in D than Chase Mondi's vault, actually scored the same. And it sort of indicates to me that the Yurchenko style vaults are actually scoring a little bit better in men's artistic gymnastics right now. And I would be interested to see if the men's program might look towards incorporating more of the Yurchenko style vaults into their lineup. So Oklahoma started on pommel horse, and as I mentioned at the beginning, they were one of my picks for the national champions. But to do so, they had to be perfect because they were going to end up with a pretty significant difficulty score deficit to Michigan and Stanford. So the first 3 pommel horse guys go up: Tyler Flores, Fuzzy Bennett, Zach Nunez. They were lights out, and I was like, oh my gosh, they are going to do that. They are on fire. Unfortunately, and this is so sad, their pommel horse star, Ignacio Yakers, fell, which almost certainly was going to take them out of the running for the title from the start. Michigan started on parallel bars, and they were strong from the start. Evgeny Semeniuk went up with a 14.066, which would end up being the 3rd highest score of the night, followed by Paul Judah's 14.2, which would ultimately actually crown him national champion on parallel bars. So from the very start, the very first rotation, no one was able to top Paul Judah's score. And then Stanford ended up starting on high bar, which was notoriously the tightest scored event of the entire weekend, but they did pretty well there. They improved upon their qualification score. So following the first rotation, it was 1st place Nebraska, 2nd place Michigan, 3rd Stanford, 4th Penn State, 5th OU, and 6th Illinois. So in rotation 2, Illinois was in a huge deficit, but they were heading to their strongest event, and they were expected to jump up in the standings. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out exactly as they had hoped. So their pommel horse star, Brandon Dang, had a fall, and honestly, it was one of the weirder pommel horse falls I have ever seen. Basically, he sat his scissor, which is a pretty easy skill for him. While it wasn't meant to be for him to be NCAA champion this year, I think he's probably going to end up rebounding well heading into the Cairo World Cup this coming weekend. Kyan got Stanford started on floor, and it was a fine routine, but it was followed up by Asher Hong's floor routine, which was glorious. So he opened with a front double full to double front, which gave him bonus points. His routine, it's just so clean in the air, his toe point, everything. I will say his scale is also probably one of the more consistent ones of anyone in the NCAA. And then he stuck his dismount and gave this Chris Brooks level of celebration. And ultimately, that would be the routine that would win the national floor title. For Michigan, they had a masterful set on high bar, taking the highest high bar total of any team that night. Unfortunately, there were falls from Taylor Christopoulos of Nebraska on parallel bars, and so they weren't able to capitalize on that lead that they had coming out of rotation won. So following the second rotation, it was Michigan in first, followed by Stanford, Nebraska, Penn State, OU, and Illinois. Now, in the third rotation, Stanford had a bit of a meltdown on pommel horse, massively opening the door for Michigan, and they dropped down into fourth place, over 4 points behind Michigan. A strong rotation from OU on vault actually moved them up into second place. And then at this point, Illinois and Penn State were very, very clearly out of the running for that national title. Heading into the fourth rotation, Michigan decided to join the meltdown fun on pommel horse. Paul missed his hand on the pommel. Again, it was a really, really odd fall for the veteran, to the point where I actually had to ask some coaches if there was something wrong with the pommel horse, because two of the most consistent people had very odd falls. The consensus was no, there was nothing wrong. It just something that happened. Aronson Mansberger, who is Michigan's best pommel horse worker, he also fell. So while this is happening, Stanford is over on still rings, and they put up a huge score with Asher Hong's 14.433, which would also lead him to be national champion on that event. Following the fourth rotation, Michigan still magically held the lead over OU in second and Stanford in third. So in the fifth rotation, Patty Hoops was trying to break the curse of the pommel horse specialist who fell before him. He hit a great set, and that would ultimately crown him national champion. Stanford was moving to vault, known for being one of the highest scoring events, and they were trying to overtake Michigan. Coy finally back in the vault lineup. I mean, we did see him in qualifications, but aside from the national championships, we haven't seen him in vault thus far. Colt Walker was spectacular with a stuck vault. And then, of course, Asher Hong performed the most difficult vault of the competition, performing the Risei Guang. So after vault, Stanford took the lead by 0.5 point over Michigan. Now, at this point, Michigan was headed to the highest scoring event. Stanford was heading to their best event, and it was going to be so close. Like, the tension heading into this final rotation was so palpable. And I'll say one of the current faults that I feel of the current NCAA format is that each rotation in the finals starts with individuals. And while they are spectacular, it was definitely, it created this like lull for the team competition to resume. That said, if there was going to be a quote unquote lull from individuals, I would certainly rather have it be watching the spectacular Stuck Randy from Cam Nelson that would ultimately end up making him national champion and taking that title away from Asher Hong. But after the individuals went, it was finally time for the final showdown. So Stanford and Michigan were alternating between parallel bars and vault respectively. Jeremy Bischoff got Stanford started on parallel bars, equaling his high score for the season with a 14.0. Then it was time for freshman of Michigan, Solon Chiotti, to go on vault. A 13.833, advantage to Stanford. Their lead was increased. Then it's time for Brandon Nguyen. He was good, but he wasn't as good as he could have been. His 13.733 definitely opened the door for Michigan just a little bit. So here comes David Woolma. He is known as being the stick king of the cause 1.5, and he did just that, scoring a 14.4. Stanford was now leading by less than a point. Then came Olympian Asher Hong, who scored his second highest score of the season on parallel bars with a stick of a 14.033, and I'm not sure which of his celebrations was bigger, his stuck dismount on floor or his stuck dismount on parallel bars. Like, this man was hyped. He was so excited. Then came Frederick Richard, and Frederick Richard basically was like, oop, copy paste on David Woolma's vault. He also scored a 14.4 on vault. So it's now unbelievably close. It came down to the final two people that you would want in your lineup: Colt Walker on parallel bars and Paul Judah on vault, both with exceptional records on those events. So Walker was incredible on the event, but he didn't stick his dismount, which again opened the door just a little bit for Michigan. Judah only needed a little more than a 13.8 to win. So everything's done at this point. Everyone is sitting staring at Paul Judah. at the end of the vault runway. He has stuck this vault so many times, whether he's competing for Michigan or Team USA, and it felt like as much of a sure thing that could be. But this was the pressure of all pressure. This was the only major title he didn't have, the one he desperately wanted. Maybe, perhaps, he was thinking like, hey, if I win, then I can propose to my longtime girlfriend. Like, there must be so much pressure on him waiting to do this vault. So he goes to run. It's stunning in the air, but the landing's a bit unstable. He is off to the side. He hops out of bounds. The line judge flag goes up, and everyone is sitting there like, is it going to be enough? There was like so much suspense. It was like you could hear people's like heartbeat, like, is it going to be enough? Is it going to be enough? And you're watching around and people are like on both sides with Stanford and Michigan are kind of like holding each other's arms, and you can just feel the tension. And then there it was, before you even saw the score, you see Paul Judah crumple to the ground next to Rithik Puri. And Michigan had done it just barely. Paul scored a 13.966, well below what he normally can score, but they did it. They won by 0.163. So at this point, I'm watching the 2014 team, the team that I was a manager for, who are all sitting over the tunnel at the University of Michigan Chrysler Stadium. And they are losing their mind because they are the last Michigan team to have won. They won at home. They are now watching the 2025 team win at home. And it was just a really special and surreal moment. And it's the atmosphere that you would want anything to be for a national championship. I mean, people are going crazy, like clapping, cheering, crying. Following the win, we all of a sudden see Reina Gugino, who is Paul's longtime girlfriend, also on the stage. And he decided that this would be the moment that he is going to ask his longtime girlfriend to marry him. She said yes, and it felt like everything was the fairy tale it should be. And I think for everyone in the Michigan contingent, I think it was that fairy tale. But if you looked over to the Stanford side of things, you could see this kind of like struggle brewing. And it quickly became evident that Stanford believed that Paul had both feet out of bounds on his vault, meaning that Stanford should have won if they were correct. So I have spoken to countless people to get perspectives on all of this, right? I've been incredibly open that I am a Michigan grad, that I worked for the Michigan men's gymnastics team. And so I'm always particularly careful of any room for bias that could pop up in these areas. So I have talked to judges, parents, media, fans, people from Stanford, people from Michigan, those who are neutral. And here is the best way that I can summarize what has happened and how potentially we as a community need to move forward. So screenshots upon screenshots upon screenshots have been passed around, all different angles as people analyze. And Paul's landing on vault was so close that Brody Malone, who's a Stanford grad, initially called it as 2 feet out of bounds, which would have been the 3/10 deduction. But then there was a replay from a different angle, and he sort of recanted and said, no, I actually think it was just 1 foot, which would be a 10th. So all of that to say, you can imagine it's been very, very, very difficult for those into the Stanford contingent because from their viewpoint, they believe that they lost this championship over the wrong call. So I want to break this down. It is maybe confusing and or amusing in an ironic sort of way when a competition in any sport is so close at the end that these last minute calls is what makes the difference, because it assumes that the rest of the competition was judged well, and it was this one moment that defines the win. But overall, there's a lot more to the story. Stanford blew a 4-point in difficulty advantage at this competition. 4 points. And this competition wasn't like a whoopsies, this has never happened to us before. They blew an over 6-point lead at MPSF when they lost to OU. And so what's clear to me is that there was not enough focus on execution this year at Stanford. And this was the result. All that to say, this is not just about this one vault by Paul Judah. And it's so easy for it to seem that way. But because Paul Judah's vault is at the center of this controversy, we're going to dig in. So, as I mentioned earlier, even the broadcasters had different opinions on the views shown. It is a very, very close call. So we have to ask who would have the best view, and that would be the line judge looking right at the feet of Paul Judah. So the line judge, she called it on the field of play as a 0.1 deduction, meaning she saw one of Paul's feet out of bounds and the other on the line, which is considered in bounds. Lines are considered in bounds. So she reported that to the D1 judge. So like you can see if you go to the individual feed video, you can see her walk around to the D1 judge, hand what she assessed, and the score gets input as a neutral deduction, and that's that. So did she make a mistake? She's human, right? It's always possible to have made a mistake. And I and several of my colleagues have looked at this vault backwards, forwards, sideways till Sunday. In my opinion, there is no indisputable evidence, listen to those words, indisputable evidence to overturn the judge's ruling on the field of play, right? So this is a concept that comes from football, where there is a play call made by a judge who is human. And it's typically something that can go really closely either way. And to overturn that, there has to be indisputable evidence to overturn it either way. So from one view, it's a little fuzzy and it looks like maybe possibly both feet are over the line. However, equally, there's another view that is clear or seems clear that he is not over the line. So what do you do with that? I would say for a judge who's making a split-second decision, this is not a scandalous or controversial call. Because if it is unclear after multiple scrupulous viewpoints from screenshots and videos after the fact, that the judge should not be considered incompetent or wrong for a judgment call that frankly no one can come to a consensus on from video review. And if gymnastics is going to use human judges with human perception and not give them the option of video replay, there has to be a level of acceptance of human judgment and error. Now, I am not saying she did err. I am simply saying there has to be an understanding that errors are going to occur. And I view this really similarly to the women's floor situation at the Paris Olympics. So Sabrina Voina was given an out of bounds that cost her the bronze medal. So originally Anna Barbosu was awarded or stated to be the bronze medal winner, and then it went to Jordan Childs and then back to Anna Barbosu. Well, there's this third woman, Sabrina Voina, who was given an out of bounds neutral deduction that did not exist. That cost her the bronze medal because the line judge was not given the option for video review. So if these situations are going to come up, my question to the FIG and the NCAA Rules Committee and the coaches and the judges are how many of these close calls are going to have to happen before we are allowed video review on line judging calls that are that close? Like, are we going to move to something like tennis that uses automated line judging? And I understand that maybe video review from multiple angles or automated line judging may not be feasible for regular season meets, but it could and should be feasible for the major championships when major titles and financial implications are on the line, because you never want a team like Stanford, who was in the running to break the record and have history made to win 6 in a row. You never want them leaving believing that they lost the championship over a line judging error, right? That is never the scenario that you want. Like if someone loses because they didn't perform as well as they should have, that's one thing. But you never want to leave thinking, like I was cheated or a judge was incompetent or the wrong call was made. And if there was video review in this situation, don't you think maybe those athletes and those coaches would feel more confident in the call that was made, or it would have the ability to overturn that call? So I think a change ultimately needs to be made. It is my final opinion that this is not a scandalous call. It was incredibly close. I'll restate it again. After multiple views, after talking to multiple different judges, everyone agrees this is so close. And a call was made on the field of play, and there was not indisputable evidence that it could be overturned, even if we had a policy that would allow for video replay in this moment. So, all that to say, congratulations to the Michigan Wolverines on their title, and may any sadness or disappointment that came from this call spur gymnastics leaders into action to move the sport into the 21st century with better technology for line judging. Now, aside from this controversy, this was, in my opinion, the most exciting national championships we have seen in years. And it is a shame that it has been slightly marred by a controversy, but ultimately it was a heck of a competition, with Paul Judah ending the competition, crying on the floor, and getting engaged to the love of his life. And it honestly doesn't get much better than that in sports. So let's take a look to how our predictions held up. So remember, I had said OU or Michigan were going to win. Check, Michigan won. I had said Frederick Richard would win all around. Check there. I said Taylor Burkhart or Chase Monty would win floor. It actually ended up going to Asher Hong, who had a great set. I think there's a case to be made that Chase Monty could have won that. His routine was exceptional, and I definitely want to give him props for that routine. For pommel horse, I said it would be Patty or Brandon. Patty took that title for the second time in 2 years. Still rings, I said unequivocally would be Asher Hong, which was true. Vault, Cam Nelson, also true. Parallel bars, I was pretty off. I thought it would go to Joshua Carnes or Frederick Richard. Paul Judah took that title from the first rotation on, and no one ever looked back. And then high bar, I said Emery Dodonley, and that did end up coming true. A couple other things to highlight. Fred Richard was named an All-American in every single event that he competed with and came away with 2 national titles. This is so impressive. Like, wow, this kid is so amazing. And also, he just made the competition so fun. So after every single landing that he made, like dismount, he would have a different type of celebration. So you never knew what was coming. And so I thought that was a small thing to keep the competition really interesting. Also, quick shout out to Fuzzy Benes, who did all around for the first time since his thumb injury, and he ended up placing 3rd behind 2 Olympians. So I think that's something to be really proud of. Earlier this season, or even last year, you may remember that I reported that USA Gymnastics would not be taking any all-arounders from the NCAA Championship to the U.S. National Championships. They have since changed their mind, and they are going to take 2 athletes from the top 10 who are not pre-qualified. So currently that would be Eric Upton and Isaiah Drake. I think we definitely saw a retirement post from Isaiah Drake, and I think Eric Upton may be retiring as well. But if one or both of them retire, then Tyler Shimizu would potentially qualify. I'm going to check with USA Gymnastics and get back and confirm, but just so that you are aware that there are potentially some qualifiers to the national championship from this competition. Taylor Christopoulos of Nebraska did win the Nissen Emery Award, and then Matt Burgoyne of Oklahoma won Elite 90. Moving on to international competition. So the All Japan National Championships also happened this weekend. I'm not sure why all the best competitions overlap, but I was not really able to follow All Japan Nationals that closely. I was just able to get a few glimpses here and there. So I'm really hoping that Catherine of Magnastics is going to do a recap with Sam Oldham soon so that we can get an in-depth analysis from them, because I would love to know more specifically what happened. What I do know and what I can tell you is that the battle for the all-around title was extremely intense between 2020 Olympic all-around champion Hashimoto Daiki and 2024 Olympic all-around champion Oka Shinnosuke. Shinnosuke was leading after day one by a little over half a point, but Hashimoto came back with a massive 85.464 on day two, which blows all of the current all-around scores in the world out of the water. So for reference, that score would have placed third at the Olympic Games last year. And this code of points is now counting 2 less skills on 5 of the events, and vaults were all downgraded by 0.4. So it's a massive, massive, massive score. So it's good to see him back a little bit healthier and doing the type of gymnastics that we're used to seeing from him. A quick rundown of who won events at the Doha World Cup. Milad Karimi won floor with a 14.466. Hamlet Manoukian of Armenia won pommel horse with a 14.7. Yo Hao came back to the international stage and won rings with a 14.4. The consistent king Artur Davtyan won vault with a 14.449 average. Nazar Chapurni won parallel bars, and Milad Karimi also won high bar with a 14.5. A few other things to note, Jesse Moore won his first World Cup medal with a silver on parallel bars, and he also submitted a G skill on pommel horse. Some upcoming competitions to keep in mind is the Cairo World Cup. So Brandon Dang and Patty Hoops basically had to immediately hop a flight to Cairo right after the NCAA Championships. So I'm not sure if they're going to be exhausted or energized flying all the way over there. And then Alex Diab is expected to join them there. There are also the Swedish and Icelandic competitions going to be happening as well. So thank you to everyone who has been writing in with their comments and been providing feedback on the Apple Podcast. I really do love reading those reviews from you. So thank you so much. It really helps the podcast out. And if you would like to donate financially, you can donate via PayPal or Stripe. And the link is in every article and in every show note on our website. So if you have questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email us at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.